Alright, folks, so this is the final piece about This Is Water. As you saw in the previous video, you saw how we could draw the same parallel and intent of This Is Water, which is very tantamount to the subtle art about not giving an F. Alright, so as you can see, that it is the same schema I'm talking about. Well, what kind of narrative anecdotes does David Foster Wallace use? And of course, he uses a fish to illustrate how all commencement speeches begin with platitudes, but more importantly, how unaware some people are. And then, of course, he does the bar people who are having drinks. And that is when, of course, when one is right and one is wrong in reference to one situation, about how one is alive after almost being lost in a blizzard. And then there's a supermarket guy, the one who, after a hard day's work, attempts to go to the supermarket and he's confronted by other people who likewise and similarly are also attempting to gather the groceries before going home. So everybody is during that particular situation and everybody's way. And then, of course, it ends with the fish. Here, what I've done is I've created a summary, and the purpose behind This Is Water, it is attempting to give reason and significance as to what was fundamentally the purpose of a liberal arts education, and taking into account that this was a commencement speech, it's the graduation speech of the class, and often they are delivered by people of status or renowned people in their field. In this case, David Foster Wallace at the time was a preeminent, highly revered writer. Okay, this is my summary. What's cracking, y'all? What's up? I just ate some pho, so I got mad energy. What's up, pho? Yeah. Alright, so the point of liberal arts education is to be well adjusted. And I've made this in quotes because well adjusted, we could take that concept and see how it also applies to this other art. When one doesn't give a fuck, one could argue that she or he is well adjusted. And similarly as well, if one decides to choose to not live by the dream and follow the agreements, one is well adjusted. Henceforth, those people who are in the peak of self-actualization are well adjusted. And he goes about to demonstrate by questioning one's certainty through the limitations of institutional systems, being primarily the job market, commerce, the purpose of education, and more importantly, the day in, day out. Okay? So, here what I've done then, what he decides as when one gives too many F's, when one is not choosing to give an F, he says that as maladjusted. And that, of course, means that one is the center of the world. In other words, one feels as though they're special, one feels like they're trying, one feels like they're wrong, okay? However, very much similar, he claims that the apex to be, what we're all trying to do and accomplish is be well adjusted, okay? Which is to be consciously aware, to take any situation and not subject yourselves to the optics or use your former pattern to determine the situation at hand. Okay, now having said that, these are the key, I think, elements espoused and delivered by David Foster Wallace. Okay, one right here is an element of not being adjusted is that thinking by default is not being conscious, and there seems to be some critique, particularly by educated people. They're not one and the same, and so that is being just because you think doesn't necessarily mean that one is aware and not necessarily questioning the rat race and subjecting the smoke and the drain. That is being maladjusted. However, if one feels as though they are, by virtue of partaking in social media or perhaps being domesticated by parents, this, according to him, could very well be what water is. Learning how to think takes constant practice and repetition. It's being aware of your truth, being conscious all the time. And that is life, and according to him, this is a form of death. he actually goes as far to suggest this is of life and death importance. One which is authentic, well, self-actualization, death, which is being a copy. Here, this is a great importance. The default setting. He talks about how that is in essence giving an F. That's his take on it. It's slowly sinking into the dream. And by dream is that oftentimes corporate America would encourage and often rewards, I think, practitioners or participants of the race. And I kind of like how he indicates how one slowly slips into their sense of worshiping. And as such, then, this little art doesn't state how in the everyday practicum one slowly begins to give it up, or how long does it become to take domesticated and whatnot. So I kind of like that he said that. But the opposite of that is that true freedom is not succumbing to the real world. And real world, again, we'll talk about, and we have seen, of course, how there isn't any reality because we are all, in fact, wrong. Okay? And so we have to question it, and of course, by the four agreements, the dream is an illusion, and in fact, there's a lot of smoke, so there isn't any reality, particularly with the world outside of anybody's head. Okay? And as such, then, being maladjusted is being a slave to your own head. In other words, not having the capacity to not entertain, articulate the voices in your head, in other words, your ego. But being well adjusted is breaking free by realizing one is a prisoner to begin with. And again, a lot of this is encouraged by elements of the subtle art about not giving enough. Shame, fear, the crisis. Okay. Here again, it talks about being maladjusted is participating in what doesn't have meaning, and he gives the element of the people of constantly dying. Some people think that money has meaning, but it's insatiable. It's never enough. It's the opposite of the backwards law, which stated by Mason. Some people subject themselves to beauty, but all of us inevitably get old, and people die, and whatnot. Okay, if you think you're smart, you feel like you're dumb. If you think like you're powerful, you always feel threatened. Those elements don't necessarily have meaning. That's not being well adjusted. However, is again very much similar. One to really think is one gets to decide what has meaning, and it's very similar to Mark Mason's as just being average, just finding the beauty in mundane and doing it in a sexy ways that will not get fanfare, that will not be considered as exceptional. And being well adjusted is just participating in it that way. One decides what to give an F about, which is, oops, that's the same thing, of course, as Mark Mason. So that is what water is. And again, I just want to state how this is very much the ledge. And I kind of like how it says to begin. This is post-education. This is quote-unquote real life. And this is kind of, again, what school doesn't teach you. And I think kind of like Mark Mason wants to inch towards. And I like how it says, well, begin. So start now, very much with the same intent of to the steps of how one can become self-actualized by becoming